Nails is my co-moderator and has charged this panel with starting with an anecdote each that they think characterizes their time period at camp under a variety of owners and directors. And just to remind, we're talking in this part of the session about our history as a camp and how that impacted our program and the experience of Pathfinder. And we'll start it off. I think, let's see. JLay? Start with JLay at that end.
That's the easiest part. Thanks, Lance, because everybody would have taken everything I would have had to have said. So I came up here in '65 to act as a CIT and work on the tripping program. But mind you, I had never been on a canoe trip in my life, didn't know anything about paddling a canoe, let alone how to carry one of the damn things. So I went into their terrific program of training, which lasted for ins and outs, where I was paired with a guy who was about 225 pounds, and I was in the water for about 3 days. I then was given a crash course on how to paddle. That was 45 minutes. And then somebody showed me how to carry a canoe with what they called at that time a head pad. So if any of you might be in your late 50s and 60s, you might remember what a head pad was. A head pad was made of foam rubber, baby diaper pins, and what you would do is hold it between your legs, and when you flip the canoe up, slide it over your head, let the canoe come down on it, and walk away. Well, when you walk from the kitchen dock to the cart, or kitchen dock to the canoe dock, that seems pretty easy. So I thought, okay, I'm ready to go. So I go on a canoe trip, start out Source Lake, Sandy Gauge, starts out, and I'm in the third canoe. We get about halfway out the lake, and he is a half a lake ahead of me. He slows down, he stops at the portage over the railroad tracks, I catch up, and he takes off again. So I get to my very first portage with a head pad, which I kid you not was about this thick. Give you an idea of foam rubber. So I put it between my legs, flipped up the canoe, went, crap, this thing is heavy. Head pad fell into the lake, so I walked around with a head pad soaking wet for 4 days. Now, the point of the story is this. When you talk about where it was in 1965 to where it is today, and you talk about being ill-prepared to go out on a canoe trip, that was probably me. And in today's world, that doesn't happen here. One of the things that I am amazed at is the amount of time and effort that's put into help training. And by doing that, it not only helps the staff person, but it makes it an enjoyable experience for the campers. So that was my indoctrination into a little bit of the history. You no longer see head pads. The canoes are a lot better. Oh, and the other good deal was, since you were the last person here, you got to pick the last canoe, which was the one that leaked and weighed 30 pounds more than the other canoes. So my goal was to get to become a head man so I could select a new canoe and not have to put up with the crap that a third man had to put up with. So,
hey. And you did very well with it, JLay. Welcome to the club. We had one of those anecdotes earlier in the season. I guess I'll say this. Chief Norton, Bill Swift, Frank Horton, Roy Thrall, Mac Rand, Mike Sladden, and Glenn Arthurs. I think we determined the other day that I am probably the only person who worked for all of them. There are people there are people here who were here under Chief's era, but they were campers at that time. And there may be one who worked here also with all of them. And so since I knew and know all of them, I am proud to report that every single one of them loved Pathfinder and wanted to make it better. And they did everything they could to make this a better place. And that's still going on today.
Are you going to share the list, the ranking? Are you going to share the ranking list of who you like the best? Who's the best one? Who's the best owner?
Ask him about 11 o'clock.
Well, he threw up in our closet in Rochester. So
That is a bonus point.
There you go.
There's the story.
That was my brother.
Like Gyro, I was here for Chief, Frank Horton, Swifty, my father. And I can tell you that every single one of them, it was about opportunities afforded to kids. The opportunity to come up and experience something they can't experience at home. To become self-sufficient, to become a man of they learn to become the men they are today. And as I look out there, I see a lot of familiar faces, and each and every one has a number of stories they can tell. But going back to it was all about opportunities for each and every one of them, to afford those opportunities to our youth and the kids that came to Pathfinder.
Well, I talked to Sleds about a week ago, and he said, Rich, I want you to be on this panel and talk about history of the park. And I said, sure. So what am I going to talk about? So I said, I really want you to fill in some of the gaps of when your father was there. And, you know, being a kid and growing up with Swifty as your father was a pretty intimidating task. You know? The guy was, to me, you know, larger than life. And I really respect this. I wouldn't be here right now and doing what I do and carrying on his passion and what he believed in, too, if it wasn't I believed in that man. But he came up here during the World War II time. His father sent him up here as a safe haven. A lot of kids came up here originally, and that's where a lot of the foundation of the camp came. He ended up going to camp when he was going to Cornell. I was director of tripping, and he fell in love with the place. And after camp, I remember he used to tell me he used to go over to the old Highland Inn and do day guiding trips, and met a great guy at the time, Dave Wayman, who became partners when they started the Algonquin Outfitters. But when my dad bought the camp from Chief Norton, it was pretty turbulent at the time. But he really believed it was 1 year after he started the Outfitters. The camp came available. I think it was Nick Zorro. Is that right, Gyro? Zona. Mentioned that, hey, this camp's for sale. My dad just, that was what brought him up here. And, he tried to work out a deal. And I don't know if any of you guys know much about the legacy of Congressman Frank Horton. He was the owner for about 3 years in the camp. But I always remember as a kid, he'd come over and visit my dad, always wear the suits, and wear the little, typical politician with an American flag. So I remember he gave me one of those as a kid, and I cherished it for a while. But, at the end of that, my dad, it was a little turbulent again, and I think it was through Nick again that Roy, who had been a long-time camp director for a number of years, too, with Nick, both of them, brought the two of those guys together, and they worked wonderful together for a number of years. And for, I guess, 14 years I was at camp myself. 14 great years of my life. It truly inspired me to be the person I am now. But, at the very end, it was really tough on my dad. It was probably some of the darkest days of his life. He just loved his camp so much. And his health was not good, and he had to give it up. And it was, for him, I just used to see him at his office, and you could see how much his heart was broken. That this place meant so much to this guy. And one of the fondest moments for me is 10 years later, I believe it was the 85th reunion. I got to bring him over to the island for the first time. And you know what? It was just like a kid in the candy store again when he came here, just reminiscing with all these great friends of the past. And I remember he gave a great speech in the dining hall that night. I don't know where he pulled that out from, but it was he certainly knew every trick in the hat. But that was my father's legacy at the park, and I feel quite honored that I actually get to share that, and it was really inspirational to me. So.
Hey.
I was told there'd be no crying.
History, come on.
I know.
It's an emotional task.
I'm the one crying.
I I could write a book, and I did write a book with my stories. So you could turn to pretty much any page, and you could find something. Volume 2 may be Mac's Best Part 2. Ann and I recently moved to Lake Placid. If you guys know the Adirondacks, it reminded me, one of the main reasons was because it reminded me of here, and it was a lot closer than where I used to live. And I was at an auction the other day of one of these amazing great camp auctions with all this cool stuff. If you wanted to get a mounted animal head, that was the place to go. Great artwork, all sorts of cool stuff. But they had about a half dozen wood canvas boats, all in pretty rough shape. And I was just taken with them, just oohing and eyeing. And this guy who worked for the auction company came over and he said, you know, what do you like those boats? Kind of like, what's? I said, yeah. Yeah, I do. And if you have a little while, let me tell you why. And I proceeded to launch into why. Earlier this spring, I'd been working at an outfitters in Saranac Lake. And canoe tripping in the Adirondacks is a little different from here. You know, Canada is a very traditional canoeing kind of a place. We use wood canvas boats. We use wooden paddles. We don't hit and switch on either side. You know, we do the J-stroke. We know it's just a different style. And I was at the outfitters one day at work, and this new boat came in, and the owner, who is, I have to admit, is a very good paddler. He kind of wrote the guidebook on the Adirondacks for paddling. And he's sitting there with his hands on his hips looking at this brand new shiny Winona made of transparent Kevlar and aluminum gunnels, and he said, wow, what a gorgeous boat. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, what a piece of... I knew right then I was in the wrong job because this guy and I were never going to see eye to eye. So I'm talking to this auctioneer guy, and he said, what is the big deal about these boats? I said, this boat is alive. Somebody, see all those tacks there? A human put those tacks into that boat. You know, everything here is man-made. It didn't come out of some mold out of some factory. Some guy in his garage built this, or, you know, there's a history to this. This boat has stories to tell. And I think when I look back on my 30 active years at Pathfinder and all the time since then, that one of the great things that Pathfinder gave me was an appreciation for that kind of thing, for our natural world and the gifts that we are surrounded with here. And I'll talk later today a little bit more along those lines. But to me, it's about appreciating what we have here. Sometimes it takes a little perspective and a little time away maybe, but that moment of looking at that boat and trying to explain to this guy, and I think he was starting to get it. Either that or he was just falling asleep. But he was nodding a lot. It might have been nodding off. But anyway, that was it for me. So, thank you.
My name's Tripp. I started here in 1980. I got up here because Sky Folks was my next-door neighbor. And Skylar had this map on the wall with all these little pins in it, different colored pins, you know, for each canoe trip that he went on. And that's all he needed. I mean, like I came in and saw that map, and I thought, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I need to have one of those things. And there's a language with that map that everybody that comes up here tripping through the park, it transcends generations. I remember in the 75th when Mac did the first reunion, and we were working, I think I was a second man, and we were carrying everything up. And I remember, I think it was the Ludwigs I brought to their tent, and they had a map. We started talking about, so what trip did you do? And it was like, oh, we did, you know, we started off in Kiosk and went to Cedar and then came down. Did you hit catfish? I hate it when you hit catfish where there's a tail. Oh, yeah, and the back. And we're having a conversation like we went to camp together. Right? I mean, it's unbelievable. That language that we all share, that you can talk. My wife always says it. She's like, it's like you guys are speaking a different language. You guys know exactly what you're talking about, and I have no idea, even if I had the map. And I think that's the thing to me, that as much as that has changed, so much of it is exactly the same, and that's pretty special stuff. So, and now I get to share that with my kids. I have two boys that are coming now, and we were chatting about canoe trips and did you stay on this campsite and all this stuff. My wife, who hasn't seen me in 7 days, is on the phone like, this isn't even worth being on the phone right now with you guys, the three of you. So that's my thing.
Hi, I'm Gill Stanley, and I started at camp in 1999. This is my 15th year up here. I'm a little confused as to why exactly I'm up here. There seems to be a bit of a drop-off in age right here. But
Are you saying we're old?
That's what he said.
I'm trying to say it very politely that you're old.
That's definitely what he said.
But I don't know. I think I have an interesting perspective on the history of the camp based on the sort of two jobs that I do up here. Number one is I've been the facility director for the last 5 or 6 years, I guess. And every time I'm on a project, fixing something or building something new, I'm essentially affecting history. I'm fixing something that somebody in the past has built or building something new. And then the other perspective I have is I've been working on a lot of media projects, interviewing alumni and talking with alumni about their various experiences here. And sort of echoing what Tripp said, it's been really incredible talking to these people and realizing that no matter what era they were here, you share that common experience, those common connections with everyone. Yeah, that's what I got.
Good start, you guys. Okay, so when we wrote the panel discussion descriptions, we had highfalutin ideas as usual, right? So, and here are some of the questions, and I think you can field them as you wish. What do we know, panelists and audience, if anything, about Bennet and Gray, the founders of camp, and then what came next? So, what came...
What's that book in there?
1914, what's that page?
Most of what-
Page 17.
Every word I know about Bennet and Gray is printed in Paddles Flashing in the Sun Part 1. So...
Available on Amazon.
It was hard to find out about those guys. In fact, I'm not even sure how those names first appeared, because everybody, or the vast majority of people who think about the history of camp ownership, everybody knows about Chief. I mean, the guy owned the place forever.
40 years.
The much less known fact is that these two guys owned it before Chief was even involved. Bennet and Gray were partners. Bennet sold his share to Chief after about 3 years, and after another couple of years, Chief became sole owner. Really, all that I knew, I'm not kidding, everything I did know was in there, was that they were in the education system in, I think, Rochester, which had been a hotbed of Pathfinder folks from the very beginning, and they were the first. So if anybody out there knows anything about them, we'd love to know more. But we're just so focused on Chief, which we know so much about, that those first two guys, we're lucky. It took us a while even to find a first name for one of them. I mean, that's kind of lost in the annals of history.
How did you figure out the first name?
I might have made it up.
Okay.
What was a good name back in 1914? I don't know.
Game of Scrabble.
Well, because of Mac's research and because of the book, I had Franklin Gray in my mind, and Mac had discovered that there was a Keewaydin connection to Franklin Gray, that he had been involved with Keewaydin. And Keewaydin is the Temagami Keewaydin, the original, and there was one in Maine for a time, and then the other Keewaydin still surviving today is at Lake Dunmore in Vermont. So when I was at Camp Keewaydin in Temagami a couple years ago, I'm in their rec lodge, which looks a lot like ours, and they've managed to have someone every year of their 100-plus years inscribe on a plaque all the names of the staff for that year. And they've got, obviously, over 100 of these plaques. And in 1913 and 1914, Franklin Gray's name appears on the plaques. And so we're trying to figure out if Frank Gray, who came from a Keewaydin experience, busted his contract in 1914 with Keewaydin, because that was his inaugural summer with Pathfinder. But we think, and I think this is fair guess, that Gray and Bennet, who were in Rochester and in the education system for Monroe County schools, were aware of and were influenced and impressed by Miss Fanny Case. And Fanny Case, who was a Rochester educator who founded Northway Lodge in 1908, 1906. Northway girls? 1906. So those are two sort of tidbits, but the rest of the Gray-Bennet story remains pretty much a mystery. It sounds like Gray was more the driving force of camp, and Bennet was, an investor and a supporter and an encourager, but he didn't last as long. And according to one of the relatives of Frank Gray, whose name is Bud Wesley, is that right? I thought he tried to contact. Anyway, there's a guy named Bud Wesley, and we got to know him because his son Steve Wesley visited camp and worked here briefly a few years ago. That Gray had moved to more the East Coast from Rochester and became interested in trying to develop a camp in Maine, and had a summer camp for boys in Maine for some time. And then when that concluded, the family took over the property and still uses it today as a family camp. So aside from that, our knowledge of Bennet and Gray is pretty skinny. Others? Anyone on this? Okay, another question that came up in our minds, and Brackley and I used to talk about this all the time. Ernest Thompson Seton, the famous naturalist who had a huge influence on camping and youth development and on people like Taylor Staton. Ernest Thompson Seton is the name associated with the Woodcraft movement in camping. And Seton had some kind of influence either on Gray or on Norton, because Pathfinder definitely trended from its early years toward the Woodcraft style, as opposed to more the Baden-Powell style of Boy Scout type summer camping. And so to panelists here, any concepts or ideas about Woodcraft, Seton, or any of the influence that could have brought to the early Pathfinder?
Anyone?
Gyro, you got seniority here. Come on.
Come on, give us the difference between the two.
Gyro, you worked for all of them. You'll be working for me soon. I do know, I was a Boy Scout. I went to Boy Scout camp, and then I came here. They're different. There's no question about that. So the roots have to be from a different source or a different branch of camping. So if you have olive camping, it seems like Baden-Powell and the Boy Scouts kind of went off this way, and our camp went off that way. If that is directly from the Woodcraft movement, then it is, but it could be from some other influence. The other thing that Chief admired a lot was the ways of the native peoples, and he wove all of that into the whole program here.
Anyone, audience, anyone on the...
What's Woodcraft?
So, yeah, okay. Short panel, long description, but I wish Brackley was here. We're missing him in so many ways this weekend. He's a relative of Seton, as it turns out. And Woodcraft movement had to do with bringing boys out of urban areas in an ever more industrializing North America after the turn of the century, and having them experience the woods and self-sufficiency and rural living at a time when most of the population had moved to urban centers. And Seton was a naturalist and well known for his naturalist writings and research, and he was convinced that if boys could be sort of indoctrinated in the ways of native thinking about land and living, that they would be rescued from the perils of urbanization.
I'm Bob Ludwig.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah, I'm a Pathfinder guy. Feel like AA or something.
Come on, tell us the story.
I'm a cultist. My brother's here. He's not here to tell this story, but this difference between the scouting track and the woodlore track just reminded me of something that he was telling me last night that I didn't know. While he was here at at Pathfinder in the 50s, he worked on his merit badges. And my father was a great Boy Scouter and involved both my brother and me in Boy Scouts throughout our childhood. And while I was here, he said he got all his merit badges save one. So he missed his Eagle Scout by one merit badge because he came to Pathfinder. So it occurs to me, if he had gone to a Boy Scout camp, he wouldn't feel so guilty. He feels terribly guilty about this. He said ever since my father died, he's been thinking he should have gotten that one merit badge. So maybe it's true. Maybe it's true that Pathfinder, I remember when I was a camper, I just didn't spend the time getting merit badges. I just didn't see the point in it myself. So I was never on an Eagle Scout track anyway. That's a comment.
Anybody in the audience that was on canoe trips, canoe tripping people out there on the panel, how many people here have been on a trip, encountered a Boy Scout trip, and had to help them? So I guess that gives you the difference between a Boy Scout trip. Yeah.
Stop banging your shoe on the table.
All right, guys, in the time available, one more big question, and this would go to all, but has to do with Norton, Swift, Thrall, and Rand. So Chief Norton took camp from where it was in 1918 and made it the Pathfinder that we fundamentally still know today in values, in real estate and landscape and program. To you, the families of and the former owners themselves, what is it that resonated with you about Norton's vision that you wanted to carry forward, and what special imprint do you feel that your families or you put on the camp to add to what you perceive to be the Norton vision?
One thing I did that was most certainly not in the Norton vision was to liberate the women from the ladies' table. And have them become part of the staff and an incredibly huge contribution to the staff that they've made since 1983. You're going into my spiel for later today, so you're going to hear it all again. But I came into, I didn't think I was coming into Norton's camp. I was coming into Swift and Thrall's camp. So it's a little hard to address that. But I think also what I felt like was that they were kind of continuing the camp that they knew, and I continued the camp that I knew, but each of us put our own stamp on it, just as the current owners have put their stamp on what had been my camp. It's a little hard for me to address that directly about Chief, though, because I knew of him. My father had come to camp when Chief owned it in the 20s and 30s. My brother was a camper here during Chief's years, towards his latter end of his reign. But some of you guys are better able to address that, who were here during Gyro, especially during Chief's time.
Well, can I speak next? We'll work our way down. One thing I can really fondly remember from the story, so from Chief Norton's day, he really tried to build the in-camp experience. And I know when my father came on, he was quite proud to really try to rebuild the canoe tripping program, to be the premier canoe tripping camp, in North America. And that was his source of pride, and that's what he really wanted to draw into camp. We instilled some things like you had to go out of the boundaries. You had to push the western boundary, and back in the days with all the Coakleys and the Rogos too, he instilled a policy about all the headmen had to at least have 1 year of college or university before they could become true leaders, and then you had to pay your respect and dues if you're going to be invited back. But that's my 2 cents.
I think, looking back and somewhat what Dick said, and a lot of it for Roy was tradition. It had been a rustic canoe tripping camp when he came here. He wanted to continue that. He didn't want to, as technology improved, he didn't want to see technology part of this program, although he did want to see it as, say, power in the dining hall with a generator. That came under Swift and Thrall. But I think they both kind of wrestled with that and fought with that, because when I started here, there was no power, and it's, you know, we get those cold, dark afternoons, and the lanterns would be hung in the dining hall. You know, they wanted to improve the experience, but at the same time, they wanted to keep the experience the same. And I know Roy wrestled when it came time for him to sell. He had better offers, but for him, the big thing was somebody who he could hand the baton to that would continue the traditions and the experience.
Ditto.
Sold it to you.
So he was wrong.
Good.
JLay, anything?
No, the one thing that was impressed upon me, having not been a camper and come to this island, was the fact that how much the tripping program meant to Swifty. I mean, I walked away from here after 1 year. I can remember my first canoe trip, which I said was Sunbeam. I came back from that canoe dock, from that trip, went into the trading post, was on the compass, had finished sharpening the axe, standing there with tears in my eyes, and said, I will never, ever go on another canoe trip as long as I live. 2 days later, I was back at Sunbeam. And I want to thank the director of tripping at that time, your brother, for that experience. But to get to the point at hand, the one thing when I left here in '65 was, even though I owed Swifty $82.15, got a little heavy at the candy store, was the fact that I wanted to be asked back more than anything else. And I wanted to come back for the campers and also to go on those lakes where those pins are and to have those experiences. That's what Swifty instilled, because there was nothing greater than sitting down with him, having a beer, and talking about those innocuous lakes in the park and how to get to them. So that's my point of history. It's 10 after 2. God be with you.